Buenas tardes. Continuamos con las exposiciones. Nos acompaña ahora Klaas Heisen, director de Proyectos Sostenibles para la Cooperación Alemana, GIZ, con la ponencia individual. Metodología para calcular el impacto económico de inyección de energías renovables en el Sistema Eléctrico Interconectado Nacional, SEIN. Bienvenido.
Muchas gracias. Okay, well, it's a pleasure to be here with you. I will start to get out of the way the VERI acronym. VERI stands for Variable Renewable Energy and principally comprise the fluctuating and weather-dependent power technologies such as solar photovoltaics and wind. Any power system will aim at using appropriate technology options to provide general accessibility and affordability, a reliable energy supply, and socially and politically acceptable prices and conditions. While in the past, the international community asked, what can we or you do to boost renewable energy? Now these technologies are technically mature and economically feasible. We should ask and answer the question with the due detail, what can renewable energies do for us? Or how can renewable energy significantly contribute to the goals of a sustainable power system? I will try to provide some insight on how to address this in the next 15 minutes. Sorry, wrong button. Over the last years, media coverage of the immense potential of renewable energy in Sun Belt countries has mushroomed, accompanied by new records on dynamically diminishing levelized costs of energy for photovoltaic power generation, such as the case of the Dubai auction with 900 megawatt peak plant at roughly $17 cents per kilowatt hour in October of this year. Auction prices in general have a clear tendency going down. And interestingly, Peru, the host country here, was a benchmark for low PV auction prices well into 2013. So a big success story here in Peru. While these are encouraging developments, both calls from pro-renewables advocacy groups claiming PV is already the cheapest solution and business-to-business deals with extremely preferential financing options are rarely based on a sound analysis of costs, benefits in regard to maximizing public welfare or optimizing the power systems. Most past renewable energy policies and expansion plans have all but neglected the necessary diligence regarding optimal deployment for each technology over time because they were meant to keep costs of overall deployment in check. Guiding principles were no more than X% of VERI, or a cap for VERI capacity expansion, or feed-in tariffs with a connect and forget philosophy. Instead, the integration of variable and fluctuating renewable energy in national power systems is often based on unduly simplified, populist, and outright wrong arguments. Supporters tend to downplay the need for more detail and resolution in dispatch adjustment and regulatory planning, as well as the actual risk-adjusted financing costs. While opponents tend to exaggerate the cost of grid operation, grid strengthening, and system security. Both tendencies hinder governments to pursue pragmatic power plant and grid expansion strategies as would be needed for a well-balanced ratio of reliable renewable energy and readily dispatchable power plants. In addition, energy planners, economists, and policymakers tend to transform methods and models beyond their boundary conditions, without further reflecting on countries or systems whose framework conditions do not at all fit in the effective range of these models. Conventional power systems dominated by thermal power plants use short-term economic dispatch only for the very near future, up to 1 hour. Focus on startup times and costs, as well as minimum online and offline times for unit commitment, and we're talking here about 1 hour to a week into the future. And last not least, the famous load duration curves for long-term capacity expansion plans for the next year and up to the next 30 years. But when VERI are part of the mix and when taking them seriously as a real possible contribution, the granularity of economic dispatch needs to be applied even for long-term planning. I think this is one of the most important issues to take into account. But I will delve into that later. There are also important differences between most Sun Belt countries and OECD countries. Most Sunbelt countries are characterized by, inter alia, a very dynamic growth of energy demand year after year, shortcomings in security of supply and sector efficiency. Thus, there's also significantly higher investment demand compared to gross national product than in OECD countries. In the power sector, annual growth rates of demand well above 5% are not unusual in Sunbelt countries. That given, and somewhat surprising, an in-depth look shows that WERI in most emerging and developing countries would, as of today, boast a cost-effective and a significant contribution to the key challenges of the energy and power sectors. For this, it is a prerequisite to analyze which WERI options fit best into the necessary and rapid deployment of real-life national networks and power plants. The key national WERI questions that need clear criteria and answers are: where, when, and how much variable renewable energy should be implemented in a given country on a given grid node to optimize the overall national benefit. A solid WERI expansion planning must be country-specific, pragmatic, and objective. That is, preferentially without predefined WERI goals. Thus, in some cases, this may even lead to a reduction of WERI deployment goals, especially where the latter have been defined purely on populist grounds or on murky analysis. While in other cases, it can easily lead to the inclusion of 20 to 50% of energy generated by, power generated by WERI in the short term, even when purely energy economic costs and benefits are taken into account. The substantial potential of WERI to address pressing power sector problems fast, let's say to reduce load shedding or emergency diesel generation, can only be utilized if readily usable methods and tools for national WERI analysis are available, tested, and understood. A unique feature of photovoltaics is that it can be implemented massively in less than a year from plan to operation. In many Sunbelt countries, and especially here in South America, abundant generation capacities from large-scale hydropower are available, with considerable day and week storage. The storage capacity usually varies by season and need to be thoroughly modeled. The planning practices and methods for hydrothermal dispatch applied here in South America are an international best practice for this. If optimally dispatched, hydro generation can effectively be utilized in much the same way as a large-scale battery or a pumped storage hydroelectric power plant, increasing WERI benefits in the power system. Already today, a significant economic benefit can be derived from an optimal hydro dispatch, which translates into a decrease of operational expenditures. Furthermore, compelling effects regarding energy security can be observed due to the complementary seasonality. Most Sunbelt countries, and again, especially in South America, are also blessed with a commercially feasible potential for actual pumped hydro storage, allowing for high WERI shares. I've seen in the program that a fellow speaker will talk about this topic at 3 p.m. here at the conference. However, very important, but not most prominently mentioned, difference between the energy policy and the practicability in OECD versus Sunbelt countries occurs from the diverging dynamic growth patterns of the respective markets. In OECD countries, the expansion of WERI capacities typically follow quite a different pathway due to the stagnation of local power markets. To a substantial degree, this can be characterized as a zero-sum game or crowding out competition. In extreme cases, however, entire industries face tremendous financial losses or even bankruptcies. On the other hand, Sunbelt countries have an additional comparative advantage regarding WERI optimization via policy planning. Markets with dynamic and strong growth rates will face less opposition from the established power industry. However, this also requires that implications from the future thermal and hydropower assets, as well as grid expansion and electricity market design, are thoroughly considered in WERI national analysis. To successfully harness WERI potential will require WERI support mechanisms which adequately control the costs of deployment, target and attract appropriate investor types, and vary the pace and regional distribution of WERI assets in a smart way. GIZ almost a decade ago has started to identify and to encourage the development of a growing set of appropriate tools and applied them in several countries. These can serve as inputs to the much-needed international move towards proper VRE planning. The typical questions planners need to answer are concerning system reliability, what is the safety cap for a national transmission system and for safe, worry-free dispatch, what is the safety cap for each region and grid node, also distribution over time, which would be the optimal timing and share of different renewable energy options to install over time in our country, wind, solar, biomass, geothermal, new hydro, pump storage, etc. Distribution over space, in which node of the grid should we inject which share of which renewable energy technology? What are the technical limits of the transmission system? What would it cost to overcome them? Can certain nodes actually be strengthened by VRE integration? Which part of the transmission system would warrant rehabilitation and or reinforcement earlier than planned to allow for increasing total system benefit? Winners and losers. Who will benefit from faster or slower VRE scaling up and who will pay the bill? Can we redistribute benefits or reduce costs via specific pragmatic policy measures? And last not least, investment decisions. Which amount of each VRE would be optimal today and for our country in light of the specific existing power system, and which costs and benefits would this imply? What are the options to create a suitable framework for investment for system optimal VRE pathways? I'm sure many of these things are being addressed in all of the countries, but now I'm going to give an example with a quick glance to the application of a selection of these sophisticated VRE planning tools. On the left side, we see the performance of the power grid when the VRE investment decision is left to investors seeking maximum yield, which has been standard practice in the last decades. The circles represent the actual amount of VRE energy that was proposed by the investors for each node. As you can see, there's a pretty big difference in the performance of the transmission system, and also there's a big difference in the net benefit of the power system. On the right-hand side, we see the same amount of variable renewable energy for the total system, but maximizing total system benefits and taking into account local VRE yield, local and overall load profiles, local and aggregated VRE generation profiles, seasonalities of load generation, grid infrastructure, technology costs, country-specific financing conditions, including risk premiums for legal, country, exchange rate, regulatory and procedural risks, characteristics of the current power park and of future generation expansion alternatives, CAPEX, OPEX of all available technologies, spinning reserve requirements, etc. Now, a few years of getting more sophisticated in this country. We are zooming into the picture that you've seen before on the right, adding more complexity and granularity, and we can appreciate the VRE generation hour by hour. Red circles represent thermal power generation, blue circles hydropower, and yellow PV. As you can see, in daytime the PV will spike and work in coordination with the hydropower while taking care of good transmission line performance. The difference of a well-prepared, planned and implemented VRE rollout versus a murky one easily can amount to more than $100 million a year. These and other tools are being applied in a growing number of countries. But with this, I've only scraped the surface, focusing on planning methods and support and RE deployment planning. There's much more to do to yield maximum benefit of the availability of these new power generation options. But I will leave that to another opportunity. Thank you very much. It has been a pleasure to share this with you today.